Hey guys, welcome back to my shop. I'm Laney Shaughnessy, and in this video we're going to talk about some simple setups for the Super Smart Routing Kit with regards to Rabbets, Dados, and Grooves. And I want to share with you some of the things that I use in my shop when I'm using the Super Smart Routing Kit to route my Rabbets, Dados, Grooves, as well as pockets and other things. But we're going to focus on the main three, Rabbets, Dados, and Grooves right now, and how the Super Smart Routing Kit can help you achieve perfect results each and every time. Now, one of the things that you want to make sure of is whatever project that you're routing on. In this instance, I have a 1/2-inch piece of plywood here, and I'm routing a groove for a piece of T-track. And I'm going to be routing two grooves for two separate pieces of T-track because I'm going to be making a jig for myself, kind of like a cross-sliding jig and everything. And I want the fit of my T-track into this groove to be precise. And so what I've done is I've taken my EZSMART guide rail and I went ahead and I've clamped it down on the edge of my board, and I marked out where I want my T-track to go, and I marked out one side of the edge, so basically where the edge of my T-track is going to go. And I laid out a layout line. And now that I have the guide rail clamped to the board, the one thing I want to do is I want to take my Super Smart Routing Kit, I want to get it on the track, and I'm going to just bring my bit down to where it's just a little bit above the material. I'm going to line up the edge of my bit, the cutting edge of my bit, to my line at one end. I'm going to slide to the other end and make sure that I'm tracking along my line. If I was off one way or the other, then I would just loosen up the guide rail and I would make those adjustments accordingly until I was tracking perfectly on my line. Now, I got everything set up, I've secured my guide rail with the smart clamps, everything is locked down, and I'm tracking perfectly. Now, when you are working with Dados and Grooves, Rabbets is a little bit different, so let's focus on Dados and Grooves because we're set up here. The Y limit stops are going to help you set those exact dado widths. And what we want to do is, when we're working with Dados and Grooves, we have to take into account the width of the router bit that we're using. Okay? And in this instance, when I do all of my, to make it simple for me, when I do all of my Rabbets, Dados, and Grooves, I work with a 1/2-inch router bit. And you can work with whatever router bit that you want, whatever size router bit that you want, but I work with a 1/2-inch because it makes my setup so much simpler, because the little aids that I use, and I'll talk to you about those in a minute, will help me quickly set up for my cuts. So I've got a 1/2-inch router bit in my router. My T-track it's designed to fit into a 3/4 inch groove. It's actually a little shy of 3/4 of an inch. I mean, just minuscule, little shy of 3/4 of an inch. So I want to make sure that I get the exact fit. And this is where my Y limit stops and the little jigs or little aids that I use, my little setup bars I'll call them, come in handy. Now when it comes to these setup bars, a couple of things that mine are shop made. I just used a couple of small pieces of wood, and we'll get up a little bit closer and take a look at them here in a second. But you know, there's out on the market, there are, you know, like a deluxe setup bar set and everything, like this one here from Rockler Woodworking and Hardware, that you know, you can use to help you set up. All right, so we're going to get a little bit closer now so we can focus in on the Y limit stops and the little setup bars that I make in my shop, and a couple other things I use for my setups. And I'll show you how the Y limit stops, the specific router bit that I pick when I'm doing my routing, and my little setup bars for each job that I'm doing, all work together to allow me to achieve repeatable, perfect results each and every time, whether I'm in the shop or out in the field. So let's take a look. Alright, in my router I have my 1/2-inch router bit that I use when I'm doing my Rabbets, Dados, and Grooves, especially when I'm working with things like the T-track, oak plywood, 3/4 inch oak plywood, or MDF, things like that. I always use the 1/2-inch router bit, and what that does is, because knowing the specific bit that I'm using, it allows me to work with the various setup bars that I've made in my shop. And as you can see here, this little setup bar, this little gauge, is made for a 1/2-inch bit for the T-track. Now also, if I flip it over here on the same other side, and we'll flip it right where you can read it, I also use it for the setup bar for my 3/4 inch MDF. Now this little setup bar here, this is when I'm using a 1/2 inch bit with oak plywood, because oak plywood is not a true 3/4 of an inch. So I have this setup bar here, and I have a variety of different setup bars that I've made, and again, you know, they are available in the market. You know, you can buy the brass setup bars and stuff, but this allows me to really fine tune for perfect results each and every time by making them myself. Now believe it or not, a couple of things that I also use in my shop are playing cards. Doesn't matter what brand of playing cards, just as long as they, you know, are in decent shape and everything. A playing card is about 10/1000ths of an inch thick, and it allows me to really micro adjust things using it as a shim. And I use these not only for the SSRK, but I actually use them when I'm setting up my router table, table saw, all of that stuff. They are very handy to have, so I always keep a set of playing cards in the shop, and then when I'm done working, I can call some of the guys over and we can have a poker night. Alright, so let's look at the Y limit stops and how these setup bars come into play along with the router bit. Alright, so as I said, I'm getting ready to route a dado for this T-track to go into, and I want to make sure that my fit is exactly right. So here's my setup. I've got my Y-axis loosened up, and my router is positioned to where I am on my line. You can see my layout line here, and the edge, the cutting edge of my router bit is on this line. And I made sure that I'm tracking across that whole line, and I am on track. If I wasn't, I would adjust my guide rail accordingly. Everything is set up there, so now what I've done is, if you notice, there's two Y limit stops here. I've got those positioned to where they are right up against the center arm of the sliding base of the SSRK, and I've got them locked in. That way my router can't move back and forth. Now, depending on which way I'm routing my groove, depends on which stop that I'm going to use. And in this instance, I'm going to be using my 1/2 inch bit T-track stop, and I'm going to use this stop here, and I'm going to slide it back. I'm going to drop in my setup gauge, bring the Y limit stop up to it, as you can see there, and lock it down. Now, when I am routing, I just work between these two stops for my fit. And doesn't matter how many dados I have to route, every time I reposition my guide rail and everything, nothing with the SSRK itself changes. I just position my guide rail, and I make sure that my router bit is on its line, and when I work between the two stops, I'm going to achieve the same results as the first time, the second time, and the 100th time after. Alright, so I've got this position. I'm up against my first position here. I'm going to go ahead and lock down my SSRK, so now it can't move between those two stops. I'm in one position, and I'm ready to route this first groove. Okay, let's go through a quick recap. 1/2 inch router bit in my router. My layout line on my material, I am tracking along that layout line with the edge of my cutter, and I've got my stops set up using my gauge so that I can travel back and forth to cut out this perfect fitting dado. Now, next step is I'm going to set the depth of cut. This is where a plunge base router comes in quick and handy. Alright, and we're ready to route. Once the first pass is done, simply loosen the SSRK, slide over to the next stop position, and lock it back down. and we're ready for the second and final pass. Now with that pass done, I can now go ahead and install my T-track and achieve those perfect results. And notice now my depth is set, my T-track is riding a little high because I've got another piece of material that's going to have grooves cut in the bottom of it so it can travel back and forth like runners on there. But look at that fit. I mean, it's absolutely spot on, perfect each and every time, and I can achieve those results for each of my dados and everything with my simple setup. And as I said, my setup for my T-track and my little setup bar is also for the 3/4 inch MDF. So if I was using a piece of MDF, that's the same setup I would use. I can sit there and achieve perfect fitting results for my MDF. And because oak plywood is a little smaller, notice if I put this in, there's a little bit of play, you know, back and forth. That's why I have a separate setup bar for when I'm working with oak plywood, because I want nice tight fits. I want these fits to be, you know, pressure fits. A little bit of banging in and you're good to go. And I don't like to do a lot of banging, so I want to be able to just, you know, lock that in. So that's my fit for the MDF and for my T-track. All right. That's how quick and easy it is to set up the SSRK. And if you take the time to either use the factory made guide bars or, you know, do like I do, I have a whole set that I've made for myself, and each one of them are clearly identified, so I know which one to use for whatever process or job that I'm doing. They come in handy, and it's part of my little you know, accessory collection that I make myself in the shop. I love making things in the shop, and these quick and simple aids allow me to achieve quick and accurate results. There you go. All right, so now again, our Y limit stops are set up. The distance that I travel for that particular groove or dado, if I had to repeat that dado across this board or in multiple positions, now all I have to do is loosen my guide rail, move over to the next layout line, get my edge of my router bit on that line, lock down one side of the guide rail, track, make sure that I'm tracking properly along my layout line. If I am, lock down the other end of the guide rail with the smart clamp that's on the bottom, and now I'm ready to route that next groove and that next groove and that next groove. So you can transition between cuts easily and accurately, and nothing changes with the setup of the SSRK. You're still working between those two limit stops for that fit dado, and you'll be able to repeat those steps over and over again. All right, so now this time I need to route a groove, and I'm going to go ahead and we'll use this board here that I'm routing on for 3/4 inch plywood, and I'll show you how that setup works. Now, one thing I do want you to know, and not many people know this, I mean, we have a Z-axis here. So if I had my guide rail clamped down, but I needed to cut a groove in a smaller project or anything, all I have to do is loosen the wing nuts on the SSRK and raise the Z-axis until it is sitting flush on whatever material I want to route, and then lock it down. Now I can clamp down my piece here, my MDF that I've got laid up here, and I can route the groove. I didn't have to move the guide rail, didn't have to change anything. Now I can route my groove or my dado on my piece that's of a smaller portion, and it's just that simple. When I'm done, if I want to go back to the main work piece that I'm working on, I can move this out of the way, drop my Z-axis, lock it down, and I'm ready to go. All right, just want to share that with you. So again, we're going to move over just a little bit. So I'm going to loosen all my stops and everything, and I'm going to come over and I'm just going to create another dado right next to the original one. I know that I'm tracking straight. I don't have to draw another line. I'm just going to set up a new position, and I'm going to bring my Y limit stops up to the arm of the SSRK, lock them down, and then I'm going to grab my little setup aid here for the 1/2" bit oak plywood and drop it in there, push the stop up to it, lock it down, remove it, and we're ready to go to route the next groove. Bring the SSRK home, loosen everything, move over to the next stop position, lock it down, and we're ready to go for the second and final pass. All right, with that second dado cut, I've got my piece of 3/4 inch oak here, and I've got my perfect fitting dado. And then of course, the original groove was for my T-track. These results each and every time I'm able to achieve with the simple setups that I'm sharing with you today. All right, those simple steps are the same when you're routing and working with dados and grooves. Now let's talk quickly about rabbets. Rabbets are a little bit different. You don't need any setup bars of any special size. All you need is the material that you're working with. I've got a piece of MDF clamped down to my workbench here. I've raised my Z-axis up so I can route on top of the MDF that I've clamped down. And I've got my router positioned to where the edge of my cutter is up against the edge of the MDF. Once I've done that, I'm going to lock down my Y limit stops. I'm going to grab a small scrap piece of what I'm working with, or maybe the adjoining piece that's actually going to go there, and I'm going to use this as the gauge. So let's get a little closer and I'll show you how that works. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do with the setting up for a rabbet is I'm going to drop the router down to where the bit is below the surface that I'm routing, and I want to make sure that the router bit, the cutter edge, is facing the edge of the piece that I'm getting ready to put a rabbet on. And I'm just going to bring it up to where the edge of that bit is kissing the edge of my material. Okay, once I'm in position there, now I can take my Y limit stops and bring them up against my center arm here and make sure that I cannot move side to side from my position. Now I'm simply just going to take a piece of the material that I'm working with. In this case, it's a 3/4 inch MDF. I'm going to take my Y limit stop and I'm going to slide it back. I'm going to drop my MDF in between the arm and the stop, and I'm going to use that piece of MDF as a gauge, just like I did my small little shop made setup gauges. And that is my setup. And what I want to do is I want to make sure that I have a nice snug fit. So there we go. Now if you like your material, like on your rabbets and all, if you like them a little proud so you can sand flush when you're done, just micro adjust this back a little bit, but I am going exactly to my piece. So now again, between the two stops is my travel distance for my rabbet. So let's go ahead and route this out. What I'm going to do, instead of starting off at my first stop position, I'm going to raise my bit up and I'm going to move over to my second starting position and lock down. And then after my first pass, then I'm going to slide back for my consecutive cleanup passes depending on the size bit that you're using. With this 1/2" bit that I'm using, I should only have 2 passes for this rabbit. So we'll get everything locked down. Set your depth for your rabbit. And after the first pass, go ahead and slide over for your cleanup passes. Okay, so with the rabbit cut out, we can go ahead and take our joining piece and test our fit, and perfect results. Alright guys, well that wraps up this session of the EZSMART Quick Tips. I hope some of the tips that I shared with you in this video will help you when you're working with your Super Smart routing kit. And like I said, when it comes to Rabbets, Dados, and Grooves, you can achieve repeatable results with little aids such as these shop-made setup bars or the brass bar sets that you can buy retail. Just keep that in mind. I'm always a fan of quick and simple setups and repeatable results, and I'm sure you are too. So take some of this advice and put it to good use. Until next time guys, I'll see you soon.